I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. On Thursday, FDA Commissioner Dr. Califf testified about the baby formula shortage during a Senate Health Committee hearing. Senator Tim Scott reminded his colleagues that Americans are not interested in watching, quote, each side point fingers at the other side. Scott called on lawmakers to find solutions and work on preventing another shortage instead of casting blame. Here's more from the South Carolina Republican.
Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding such a really important hearing. One of the things, as I've watched this hearing all morning, frankly, I keep hearing is who should be to blame for what didn't happen. And the one thing I think Americans are really not very interested in is to watch each side point fingers at the other side. Some say it's the private sector, some say it's government. The fact of the matter is that the average person in this country is not as interested as we are as figuring out how to make a Republican responsible for what happened, or the Democrat to be responsible for what happens, or the private sector to be responsible for what happens. This, frankly, seems to be an all-hands-on-deck kind of problem. Everybody did something that they ought not have been doing, or didn't do enough of what they should have been doing. So from my perspective, I'm not sure your opinion on that, but the truth of the matter is, it's pretty frustrating for the average person in our country who's sitting at home watching a crime wave that they haven't seen in decades, looking at the price of gas at the pump, and they're scratching their heads and they're digging into their pockets and they're coming up a little too short, a little too often, month in and month out, and then they see the absolute crisis of inflation that is weighing on their shoulders and their inability to meet the needs that they were able to meet just 18 months ago. And then finally, for mothers, fathers, new kids, they see this shortage of formula that seems to exasperate their situation in such a way that they simply can't imagine it happening here at home in America. And Dr. Califf, I hope that we spend less time pointing fingers at who's to blame and take responsibility for where we can make things better. You're a South Carolinian born in Anderson, South Carolina, and as Senator Lujan was talking about the rural aspects of his state, I will speak to the rural aspects of our state. You went to A.C. Flora High School, I went to Stall High School, and the fact of the matter is we played ball against each other, different decades, but same schools. The truth is that too many Americans in too many places, and specifically at home, are looking at the crisis that befall them, and they want solutions, not really the blame game. So I hope that we spend a few minutes on how do we make sure this doesn't happen again. But before we get there, I just want to highlight the fact that in your home state, as I just suggested, in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, we have 4 babies in hospitals due to the shortage because they've had an allergic reaction to the generic form, so they need a specialized formula. What can we do to accelerate the path to those families having what they need, and how can we ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, to your first question, what can we do for the specialty formulas, as I've reported, we have groups of FDA people, pediatricians, specialists in critical care who meet every day and talk about each case and try to get the right formula to the baby. In the case of Abbott, which was the major manufacturer of these, for the hyper-specialized formulas that had no substitutes, we actually have allowed on a case-by-case basis the formula to be sent out after careful weighing of the risk and benefit, since they were made in an insanitary plant. For the next tranche that you're describing, it's right to try a different brand, which is considered to be interchangeable. But we all know that when it comes to particular drugs, for example, sometimes what looks like the same thing doesn't
Ain't the same.
sit well. And then what has to happen is trial and error. But there are specialists involved every day in helping to navigate these. You have great ones at MUSC. I know
Yes.
the institution well. And I'm sorry that people, infants have to be in the hospital. But for that kind of critically dependent infant, it's probably the best place for them to be until we get everything back and running.
And transitioning to the latter question as it relates to how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again. The safeguards, the whistles, the bells that should be going off when we're at 11% shortage, 20% shortage, 30% shortage, 40% shortage. How do we look back and learn lessons that we use for the future?
Well, there's an old statement, there lies, damn lies in statistics. So Senator Cassidy and I have very different data. He showed the most extreme estimate. Our estimates are nowhere near what he showed. But having said that, we have a very specific list, some of which are in consideration in upcoming legislation that we're glad to share with you. The big question that I think is going to have to be addressed is, do we create a stockpile as a backup in case something doesn't work in the future? I do worry. What happens is if we're getting the Abbott plant back up, their positive cultures would be one example. I think we're going to have a surplus. We're certainly planning on a surplus within a couple of months, as I've already told you. The question is, should we maintain that surplus as a government activity for the foreseeable future? And that's a question we're all going to have to discuss together and make a decision about.